All right, we've got a nice turnout today. Welcome to the virtual Petal Fall and Thinning meeting. I'm Sarah Alane, a technician with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to begin with an introduction from Dan Donahue, the tree fruit specialist with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture, based in the Hudson Valley. Dan, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone this beautiful afternoon in the Hudson Valley. This is the second of our spring series of extension webinars in the Hudson Valley. I'll make a shout out to our commercial sponsor for our series of webinars, Owesco in Conway, Massachusetts, with a big thank you for their financial support for our spring series. The people at Owesco would like to thank everyone for this opportunity and remind that they are here for you with parts, service, and sales support through these stressful times. Owesco staff may be reached at the 800 number you see on the screen or 413-369-4335, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Thank you very much, Owesco. So our focus today is entirely on thinning. We're approaching the 8 to 10 millimeter stage, at least in Ulster County. So it looks like our timing has worked out well. Doing our play-by-play today is Dr. Terence Robinson, Cornell University Agritech. Cornell made a tour of the Hudson Valley on Tuesday. With us also, providing color commentary if needed, would be Mike Basedow, my colleague with Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program, stationed up in the Champlain Valley, and of course, myself. Sarah Alani is our host for the meeting. She is our star technician with the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program. So with that, I will, unshare my screen and turn things over to Terence. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back to talk about thinning. I first want to describe a little bit of what I saw when I was there on Tuesday. I've been from the lower Hudson Valley up through all of Ulster County, Columbia County, and spent a little bit of time in Saratoga County. And it's startling in some cases, the amount of damage I've seen. In other cases, it's very, very encouraging to see relatively good fruit set. Some of the early varieties have fruit sizes that are approaching 10 millimeters. However, I'm going to focus mostly on the main line varieties that bloom around Gala, Honeycrisp, Red Delicious, and those are still at at least on Tuesday, were slightly smaller, somewhere between 6 and maybe 7 millimeters on the largest kings. As you got up more to northern Columbia County, there are still a lot of varieties in bloom, and those are definitely at petal fall. So there's a range of fruit development up and down the valley, and I'm going to try to take that into account as I share some thoughts. Let me show a few slides to start with. So as you all know, and we've been talking about, and Dan's been talking about, there's considerable flower damage from repeated frost. But the damage level, the way I assessed it, was very variable, with some sites having damage of greater than 75% of the flowers and others having only slight damage. Seemed to me that Empire is the most damaged and Honeycrisp is the least damaged, with other varieties all the way in between. Thus, we say it over and over again, but thinning decisions really have to be made block by block this year after very careful evaluations of damage level. Right now in Milton, I just ran the carbohydrate model for Milton a few minutes ago, and we're about 130 degree days past full bloom. As I've said before, the window for applying petal fall sprays is 100 to maybe 125, maybe 130 degree days. So we're at the outer edge of applying what is called a petal fall spray, but certainly as you move more north into Columbia County, there's still time to apply a petal fall spray of 7 alone or NA and 7. I think that almost every block, but not everyone, because some are so damaged they should receive no thinner, but almost every block should receive either just a spray of 7 or a spray of NA and 7 at this 100 to 130 degree days. So I hope that those of you in Lower Ulster have already put this on. If not, as soon as the meeting's over, you should go put it on. Those in Columbia County and get up to Albany County still have a little bit of a window to apply this petal fall spray. The real challenge that I think is in front of us is to determine what are the number of sound growing fruits that we have on the tree. In most years, we have such an excess number of fruits, we just know we got to thin. But this year, there's some varieties and some blocks that may be at almost the right number of fruits right now, or maybe even below that because of the frost. So I think it's so critical to be able to know with numbers, not just sort of a windshield survey, but with some actual numbers, what you've got on the trees. The best way I know to assess that is to measure some fruitlet diameters. So if you haven't already wanted to do this, I would hope that as a result of this meeting, you would go out and tag 15 spurs on 5 trees and measure all the fruit on those 15 spurs today. And then 4 days from today, go back to those same spurs and remeasure the fruits, put the data into the fruit growth rate model, and we'll be able to tell really closely exactly how many fruits you have on that tree. It does require you to count, the total number of clusters on a few trees just to sort of set the limit. But having that kind of data is extremely helpful as we think about thinning at the main thinning window. Now, based upon the carbohydrate model that I ran just a few minutes ago, it appears, if the forecasts hold, that we'll be getting into the sweet spot for thinning, which is 200 to 250 degree days on Tuesday of next week. So the thinning window would be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week. And that gives us a little bit of time to try to collect our thoughts and make some really good assessments of what level of cropping we have on the trees. And it'll also help us determine how aggressive to be on thinning. An additional thing that I would do if I were there and looking at your block, I would cut apples as we get closer to, on Memorial Day. That's a great activity. Just go out and cut apples the day before you might thin and try to determine how many seeds are in them. And if they're relatively low seed count, they'll probably thin easier. If we got a very good complement of seeds, and that's basically 6 or more seeds, then we probably have to thin in pretty much a normal fashion. I want to just go back and review that we do propose a multi-step thinning approach. This year, because of the frost, we didn't push bloom thinning too much in the valley, but I do think almost every block, excepting a few, should receive a petal fall spray. And then, based upon the number of fruit still on the tree, which we need to assess by the fruit growth rate model, come in at a 10 to 13 millimeter spray. There will be a few blocks that don't thin well enough with those 2 sprays, and we'll need a 3rd spray at 16 or 18 millimeters. But I'm guessing that this year there will be very few blocks that we're going to need to thin at that last timing. Now, that's partially because of the temperatures that we're having, and I think that the thinners are going to work quite well. I want to review with you for just a few minutes the available chemicals for you to use at each timing. I've highlighted in blue the preferred mix that I like on almost all varieties, with a few exceptions that I'll mention in just a minute. But at petal fall, NAA plus 7 7.5 parts of NAA for hard to thin varieties, or 5 parts of NAA for easy to thin varieties, combined with a pint of 7, has an excellent thinning on a year like this because of relatively decent temperatures yesterday and today. So if you put that chemical on, say 2 days ago, you'll get pretty decent thinning out of it because of the relatively warm temperatures we're having. Even if you put it on today, it'll work great. When we get out to the 10, 11, 12, 13 millimeters, I tend to prefer Maxell and 7 because we get a boost in fruit size from Maxell for many varieties that for fruit size is a problem. However, the exceptions are Honeycrisp, where I prefer NAA and 7 at both petal fall and at the 12 millimeter stage. And then other varieties like Cortland, which I think we can thin fairly well with 7 alone a couple of times. If we get in a situation where we can't get enough fruit off with a petal fall spray and a 12 millimeter spray, and you are now with relatively large fruit at 16, 17, 18 millimeters, and you know they're not coming off, the product that's worked the best for us has been a combination of Maxell, 7, and oil. We've tried ethereal and oil, we've tried NAN7 and oil, but neither one of those has worked as consistently as Maxell, 7, and oil. The big issue for me this year is to avoid overthinning, where you have damage and weak fruits. Cases where we've lost a high percentage of the kings, and we're working with laterals and relatively warm temperatures, there is a real risk of overthinning. I think the carbohydrate model's strength is that it helps us avoid those overthinning situations. It's very simple to use, and I encourage everybody to download the phone app version, which is called Malusim on the App Store. And you can get that for free, and it's very easy to run. With a few clicks. You can run it every day or twice a day. But if we see carbohydrate deficits of less than -60, that's danger territory. And especially when we have a crop that isn't with king fruits. I also think that the carbohydrate model can help us time the sprays to achieve what we want. The optimum time for most effectiveness is between 200 and 250 degree days. So if we need thinning, we want to try to time our spray to be in that window. Hopefully we'll find a day that's good within that narrow window of degree days. However, if we don't want too much thinning because we've got damage, we might want to avoid that sweet spot and either spray before or wait a little bit later and spray closer to 275 degree days when effectiveness starts to drop off. I put also in there that the petal fall spray should go on between 100 and 125. We're at the outer limit of that right now, but I still think there's time this afternoon to put on a petal fall spray. And certainly in Columbia County, I should have run the model for somewhere in Columbia County, but I didn't. But I'm sure that the degree day accumulation is slightly less, and we're still within that window. I show here the graphic from the carbohydrate model for Milton for today, about 3 o'clock, and the data in a table below it. I'll just point out that starting around May 4th, there was a slight carbon surplus because we had relatively cool temperatures and relatively good sunshine. But starting around May 8th, we started into this cycle of deficits daily that have taken us down to about an average of -40 and for several days, and now we're dipping to even below that, getting close to -50. I show below in the table the data, and just from the 18th on to today, which is in the green box, May 21st, just to show you that daily deficits, we had one day of -60, -24, -6, and today is predicted to be just essentially 0. Why? Because of this bright sunshine level and relatively cool night and relatively modest daytime temperatures. But it's predicted to go up in daytime temperatures, and particularly nighttime temperatures start to come up. When we get into a 60-degree night, predicted at least about a week from now on the 27th, that kind of really high nighttime temperature will lead to a substantial deficit of -85. Also, this day, that May the 23rd, is predicted to be a really high deficit, primarily because it's predicted to be dark, only 10 megajoules. So those 2 days are a worry to me. The tree doesn't respond to just 1 day of carbon deficit. You'd have to have pieced together 2 to 3. So in this May 22nd and May 23rd, we've got a pretty significant deficit on the 22nd, pretty significant on the 23rd. That's why if you thinned on the 23rd, you would probably be in the danger zone. It would tell you to decrease chemical rate by 30%. Whereas before that, either today or tomorrow, it's not below this -40, and so it's not the danger zone, and so we would go with normal rates. As we go forward, and this continues to predict, I'm pretty sure that this date of May 27th with such a deficit will be probably a red, that you should not thin on that date. We'll wait and see how that develops. But this is very, very useful to help you think through, help you plan, help you avoid over-thinning. I don't know if the temperatures and the sunlight will work out just the way the forecast is saying, but it's basically saying that between now and, as far as we can see forward, the 27th, we're looking at deficits. So we're looking at tremendous thinning from normal rates. If you need tremendous thinning, it'll be great. If you, however, have a block that is iffy, this could lead to over-thinning. And that's my main message today. Every block you have to evaluate. We're in a year where we have deficits that can help us when we need thinning, but it can kill us if we're on a borderline situation. So I'm trying to just categorize things, come up with little rules for you. I don't know if this helps, but basically I would suggest that when you assess each block, if you are missing less than 40% of the king flowers, now just look at 50 clusters on the tree and keep track of how many have kings. Calculate the percentage. If you have basically 60% or more of those kings still alive, then I think you definitely should thin at petal fall with NAA and 7. And then you'll probably thin again at the 12 millimeter stage next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. But if you do that count and king flower damage is greater than 40%, meaning that you have 50 or 60 or 70 or 80% of the kings gone, well, not 80% because I have an upper limit of 75. So if you have 50, 60, or 70% of the kings gone, you're really focused, you're really dependent on a crop from the lateral flowers. And so I wouldn't put the NAA with it. I would just put 7 alone at petal fall. Now, there are a few situations where I judged that the total flower damage was more than 75% on some varieties. I think those cases you just don't thin at all. The frost has already done the thinning for you. And you're just going to adjust crop load and take off the russeted fruit or misshapen fruit and do a little thinning by hand thinning. Number 2, I really believe in this stepwise sequential thinning because we can start right now at petal fall. And maybe, I hope most of you have already put a petal fall spray on, and if you haven't, there's still a few moments because that may be all we need this year. But we can put it on without much risk and then assess what we have through measuring some fruitlet diameter, and if necessary, apply another spray at the 12 to 13 millimeters. I'm guessing, based upon what I saw on Tuesday, many blocks will need that second spray at the 12 millimeter, which will be next Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday if the forecasted temperatures hold. There may be a few blocks where there was almost no damage that will need a third spray at the 18 millimeter. And we'll talk about that in our last meeting, which will be next week. I think it's essential to reemphasize that where we've had frost damage, typically there's more damage in the bottom of the tree than in the top of the tree. And so we want to apply no thinners to the bottom half of the tree. I suggest turning off the bottom third of the nozzles. And lastly, where we've had damage, it not only damages flower parts, but it also damages leaf surfaces. So surfactants like regulated or oil dramatically increase the uptake of thinners, and you get much more response out of them where you have damaged leaves. I used to use Empire as the primary example, where we have crinkle spur leaves, we had damage to leaf tissues. There's damage this year that I saw as I traveled up and down the valley on Tuesday. And so I think it's a year not to use any surfactants. Even if you have in the past just thrown in some regulate or something into your thinner mix, don't do it this year. I should have put on there because I didn't think of it, but the same would hold for 7. 1 pint of 7 is all that is soluble. If you put 2 pints per 100, there's a lot of 7 in the mix, and it just is deposited on the leaf as an undissolved layer, and then rain or dew re-wets it and reactivates it, and you get continued thinning. I think that's dangerous this year as well. So those are my thoughts and my suggestions. I hope that we can maybe have some discussion. Oh, just one more pitch. This, I think, is a year, maybe more than any other year, where the fruit growth rate model will provide you solid, actionable information to avoid over or under thinning. If you are flying blind in a way and you're scared and you think there's more damage out there than there is, and so you back off, and then you have too many fruits, it's a big problem later on in the summer and by the time you realize it. So measuring some fruits and knowing how many fruits are actually there really helps you find that out soon enough to put thinner on. But on the other hand, if you think there's not very much damage, but there is a lot of damage, and you just go ahead and thin normal, you're going to way over thin. And that's going to really hurt the bottom line this fall if you have a very light crop with all of the problems of light crops. A little investment in fruit growth diameter fruit diameter measurements to use the fruit growth rate model will pay huge dividends, I think, in both being able to protect you against over thinning and to avoid under thinning. So I would like to now open it up for questions and hope we can get some discussion. Maybe first I would invite Dan and any of the consultants in the Valley who want to comment on what they've seen as far as crop damage and how many blocks need a lot of thinning versus no thinning.
Thanks, Terence. First thing I want to mention is a tip on calipers. If you're looking for a calipers to measure, I've measured a lot of fruit over these years, and I found a calipers about a week ago in Lowe's under the brand name General. And I don't know if you can see it here. It's this little, it's supposedly a carbon fiber caliper for 20 bucks. So I don't know how much carbon fiber is actually in it, but it's very lightweight, and it has several characteristics that make it very easy to use. One is that it fits right in your shirt pocket, really easy. Only probably weighs 2 ounces, slides very easy, and has a wide plastic jaw surface. And this thing is just wonderful to use out in the orchard. No sharp edges, so you don't poke yourself or the fruit. So again, 20 bucks in Lowe's in the tool section. I think I put out an e-alert this morning and made similar points that Terence, I think, has covered very well. I had run the carb model this morning for Marlboro, and yes, I was a little frightened by what next week might look like in terms of a deficit. I worry about a perfect storm of wonderful temperatures for hormonal type thinners. maybe thin leaf cuticles, maybe between possible, cold damage plus all the rain and cloudy weather we've had before this week, that there might, be an issue with, and now with the carb deficit. I think thinners will be very effective. But the more I look at the crop, the more crop I see out there. I was in Southern Columbia County today, and it's behind Ulster County, but it's similar in what you see. And that, at this point, there is some good setup there, and thinning is going to be necessary in a lot of blocks, but it's block by block. Don't assume that the crop is good up on top of the hill and bad down in the valley, because it could be completely flipped this year. So with that, well, I found a Honeycrisp. Yes, they're setting well on the laterals. Not the kings are pretty much gone, and so we're going to have 3 or 4 laterals of equal size, which of course makes for a thinning challenge. With that, maybe Mike, do you have any comments?
Well, I'll admit it's hard to think about. We're just getting into King Bloom up north, but certainly, from talking with growers in the Saratoga County area, very, very reminiscent of what you guys are seeing. Damage is very variable this year, so certainly just waiting to see what's actually setting up, and really block by block has really been the key message so far.
Well, let's take any questions. Anybody want to ask a question about thinning this year?
We haven't received any questions yet. As a reminder, people can type into the Q&A window or the chat window, or raise your hand.
Sarah, is it possible for people to unmute with our setup?
If they have their hand raised, I can unmute them. Well, nothing so far. Oh, here we have a question. Southern Orange County hail and cold damage. Is Maxell more dangerous for overthinning?
The hail damage doesn't necessarily make fruits easier to thin. So I would discount that in terms of the thinning, but the cold damage definitely does. And so it's just a level of cold damage. If you have most of the kings gone, high rates of Maxell can be dangerous, especially in the temperatures that are predicted to come. If, however, you've got at least 60% of the kings still alive, or you're less than 40% damage, and you cut apples and you've got more than 6 seeds, I don't think it'll thin easy. I think you'll have to put on full rates of Maxell. So that leads me to make one comment about Gala. Gala seems to come through a lot of places fairly strong. And I didn't get to southern Ulster County, but all the parts of Ulster County that I saw, Gardner, Milton, Marlborough, Highland, Gala seemed quite strong to me. And I'm thinking that if you back off, because we're worried that they might overthin, I think we'll end up with a problem this year. The only real concern is if temperatures are really high, and that's where I want you to have a little confidence in the carbohydrate model. It will tell you in that little recommendation box to either lower rates or keep them a full rate. And I would try to go with what that says on the particular day you spray.
Thank you. No further questions at this point.
Well, just one more comment that came to my mind as I was talking about Gala, and maybe people that pack and sell might want to comment to me on this. The last year, for some reason, bag market was relatively strong. And people that had large fruit size ended up not making as much money as people that had more yield with bag size fruit, particularly on Gala. I don't know if that's a one-year market trend. I've heard from a couple of packers that they think that the East is going to be a really strong bag market again. That has to play into the thinning decision on how aggressive you try to thin Gala, particularly Gala. If you're shooting for 88 count Gala, it does take a reduction in yield. You have to knock a lot of apples off to get there. And then if that's not going to be that much more profitable than growing more bushels of, say size 113 Galas, which is still a relatively good size Gala, but it probably goes in a bag, then that's a marketing decision that I think growers have to be aware of. That I've heard from two marketers, I'm not going to name them, about that issue. So if there's packers online that want to comment about that, I'd certainly welcome their comments.
We have one more question. In the past, you had recommended not using 7 for thinning of Cortland. Today, I think you mentioned using it on Cortlands. Yes,
I might have misspoken. So one of the things I don't like about 7 on Cortland is that it keeps thinning and keeps thinning and keeps thinning. So if I said that, I misspoke. I like only NAA on Cortland. Thanks for catching that.
At this point, we've answered all the questions that came in.
Well, good. I appreciate the chance to give a little more thought to this. And I really feel like that if you can run that carb model the day you spray, it'll give you some information that you can take into account as you decide when to thin. Pay attention to how many degree days you are out from bloom. And if you need a lot of thinning, try to focus it, say Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week. It's certainly in mid-Ulster County. Might be earlier in southern Ulster, Orange County. Might be a little bit later up in northern Columbia County. So I think, Dan, are we scheduled to have one more of these?
Yes, next Thursday at 4 o'clock, same format.
Okay, good.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Terence. Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time for the input. Mike, thanks for joining us. Sarah, thank you for hosting. And thanks to our participants for the questions and for joining us today. We'll see you next week.